The other day, I'd heard clips from this message that was preached by David Wilkerson. I hadn't really heard the full message before, and a lot of times you kind of get the theme of the message and you get the high points of what's trying to be said and conveyed, but I wanted to listen to this full message and get it all in context. And it was the message that David has preached on before, the call to anguish. It's one of the most powerful messages I've ever heard. And I think it was originally given in 2002. But you can listen to this message and compare it to today. He talks in this message about the church compromising with the gospel, with worship service, with its entire purpose. The whole reason for the church. And you can tell in his voice that he's broken in that message. You can tell he starts out almost sobbing. In this message. Now, 17 years later, we see this exponential slide on the hill of compromise with what's supposed to be the body of Christ. A lot of the churches have moved because they feel like they are outdated, insensitive. Our testimony is in the trash, and being branded hypocrites has pushed us further into hypocrisy, for the most part. So you can see a lot of the accusations that those looking from the outside in throw, and you're like, that cuts deep because it is true. It cuts deep because there's a little bit of truth to that. The prayers of God's people have, at least I believe, given us a slight reprieve in this country, in this situation. However, the enemy has ramped up his attacks and deceptions to counter those efforts. I heard this. This was spoken as like the message of the day. When I was listening to this message, is someone made a comment on a different program altogether, and said, this popped up as a message of the day, and I thought, well, this is, it's neat how the Lord, it's almost like a symphony, and He's the conductor. Everything falls right into place with what He's trying to tell you. Proverbs 14, verse 34: righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And sometimes, the nation, that it mentions in the Bible is more so a people, a community. Back then, a lot of the cities had kings. That it was kind of like a city nation. It was kind of a federation of cities that kind of made up an area or a people. But I thought, that went right along with that message that I was listening to. Righteousness exalteth a nation, which elevates the status, elevates the amount of blessings, that God gives a nation or a people. But sin is a reproach to any people. God most definitely will pour out blessings on a righteous nation, people, community. But the more sin is present, God will not only take away those blessings, but His presence will also decrease in that community, that people, that nation. God cannot be present in a community where His will is ignored and unadulterated sin is the way of life. And listening to what was going on, what David Wilkerson was talking about in the message that he preached, and aligning that with today and seeing how far we've come, in the 17 years since that message. It's clear. You can see it. You don't need statistics. I mean, it's in your face how these things are progressing. We always talk about the relationship, and it's a very important thing. The relationship with God, with Christ, is a one-on-one relationship. There's no debating that. That's the foundation. But a people, a community, a nation, a city, whatever you want to put in that blank there, it will be judged. It's going to be judged because of what the people in that community are allowing in. We can go to Genesis chapter 18. Starting in verse 20. And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come unto me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence, and went toward Sodom. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord, and Abraham drew near and said, wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? So, Sodom and Gomorrah, two of the larger cities that were included in this 5-city area, this stretch of cities right there next to the Dead Sea. I looked up what Sodom and Gomorrah actually mean. Of course, the English languages has adopted Sodom to represent something completely different from what the word actually means in this, but it is a representation of what was going on there. Sodom in the Hebrew language means to scorch or burn. Gomorrah, to submerge. And it's very telling because that's the way that these cities were destroyed. Because it was almost predestined that this is the way these cities are going to be destroyed. I mean, we wouldn't think of naming a city after something that could be a destruction, but this is what they were called. This is the sin that caused these areas to be just completely destroyed. And going to jump ahead here to Genesis 19, verse 15, starting at verse 15, and this is the Amplified. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, get up, take your wife and 2 daughters who are here, and go, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. But Lot hesitated and lingered. The men took hold of his hand, and the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, because the Lord was merciful to him for Abraham's sake. And they brought him out, and left him outside the city with his family. When they had brought him outside, one of the angels said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, or stop anywhere in the entire valley. Escape to the mountains of Moab, or you will be consumed and swept away. But Lot said to them, oh no, not that place, my lords. Please listen. Your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, mercy to me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, because the disaster will overtake me and I will be killed. Now look, this town in the distance is near enough for us to flee to, and it is small, with only a few people. Please let me escape there. Is it not small? So that my life will be saved. And the angel said to him, behold, I grant you this request also. I will not destroy this town which you have spoken. Hurry and take refuge there, for I cannot do anything to punish Sodom until you arrive there. For this reason the town was named Zoar, meaning few, small, and also meaning insignificant. But if you look at the name of this town before this instance, it always says that the town was named Bela, also known as Zoar. Now, I looked up Bela because I was like, well, why did they change the name? You know, God has a reason for things. So Bela means destruction. This town was going to be destroyed along with the others, along with Sodom and Gomorrah and the other two towns that were in that region. Now, we look at this, we say, okay, Abraham, but for Abraham's sake, Lot was saved and his family. They were dragged out of that town, but it was because Abraham was persistent with God. He said, please, please, not the righteous. So because of for Abraham's sake, Lot and his family were saved. Now Lot went to the ones that were betrothed to his daughters. It would have been his future sons-in-law. He said, escape with us, and they looked at him basically like, you're crazy. This thing that you're saying is not going to happen, so they didn't, go with them, but it was God's mercy to save Lot and his family. And then Lot turns around and says, I know that you plan on destroying this other town too, but will you please save it so I can escape there? And I thought it was funny because, this is something that we should take more seriously. Because that town was in sin too. There was a few people there, but it was also in sin. And I would like to do a little bit more study on why Zoar, why that was the name of the town, why insignificant, if it's related to maybe it wouldn't have as much sway over the other the towns around about, or why that it was saved, or why that he bargained for that town specifically. But the point was Lot asked God to save that town. And we find that earnest prayer is the key. Imagine if Abraham hadn't prayed and hadn't asked God to save his nephew and his family. He bargained for Lot and his family to be spared. That needs to be our prayer for those who are in a bad place, distracted from the Lord, who don't see it coming. Lot had no idea. He was sitting there at the gate, and thought, well, I need to protect these people coming in, these outsiders. Not gonna be good for them to sleep out on the streets. And he knew that he was in this situation. He knew that he was in this place that was destitute, that was all kinds of sin going on. He knew that he was in this place. But he was still there. He was living amongst all this filth. But then Lot, turned and asked God to spare the small city that was going to be destroyed, and the Lord heard him. And do you think that anyone in Zoar knew that their imminent destruction was upon them? Without Lot, praying for them, basically, please leave this town be, let me go there, leave it. If it had not been for Lot, everyone in Zoar would have perished along with the other four cities. Now, let's turn to James 1. I got this from the Amplified as well. Blessed, happy, spiritually prosperous, favored by God is the man who is steadfast under trial and perseveres when tempted. For when he has passed the test and been approved, he will receive the victor's crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for temptation does not originate from God, but from our own flaws. For God cannot be tempted by what is evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each one is tempted when he is dragged away, enticed and baited to commit sin by his own worldly desire, lust, or passion. When the illicit desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin has run its course, it gives birth to death. Do not be misled, my beloved brothers and sisters. You know, and this is not just a warning for each person individually. This is a warning for a people or a community or whatever group of people you want to say. This is most definitely it's a warning for the church. But there's a show that I listen to every once in a while, and there's a young man that got. He had kind of had some issues in the past with addiction and drugs, and this past week he overdosed and lost his life. Lost the father does the show with him, and he had seen this coming. He had seen these signs coming, so he had taken him off the show and kind of kicked him off the show for a while until he could, get everything straightened out. But this sin overtook him. It was something that he battled with, and it was something that became so great that it destroyed him. And I remember back in April when this was kind of made publicly known, that he had left the show or was kicked off the show because of this problem. And I thought, I'm gonna look up on I'm gonna use Twitter, and I'm gonna look up and see if I can find this guy, because technology is good and bad, in its ways. You can talk to everybody, and that's a good thing, and sometimes that's a bad thing. You can have a lot of things hurled at you, or you can reach out to somebody. And when I heard what happened this past week, I thought to myself, why didn't I reach out? Why didn't I? Because I'm sure 100 other people did, in that situation. Why didn't I reach out? And that's one thing that we have to ask ourselves. Why don't we reach out? If we see this happening, see that happening, what causes us not to reach out? What causes us not to yield to the Lord? Saying, this person needs help. You might be the one to reach out and reach this person. But in saying that, when the illicit desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin has run its course, it gives birth to death. And this is a problem. This is a very big problem in our country, in our world, because it's not just a nation thing. It's something that affects everyone. Everyone has something that they battle with, something that they struggle with, and we need to pray. We need to pray for ourselves as well as those around us. It's not something that you can get through yourself. But earlier this week, that was something that came to my mind. It was why didn't you reach out? There may have been 100 other people that reached out. Why didn't you reach out? Because you can do that. You can shoot a message off to anybody. You can shoot a message to the president if you want to. And he'll probably see it. He may weed right past it. You can send a message straight to congressmen. You can do all this stuff nowadays with the technology that we have. You don't have to send a written letter to somebody and maybe the secretary or whatever sees it. You can reach directly to the person's phone they have in their pocket, and that was something that it convicted me. It's like, why didn't you reach out? And I should have. But there are hundreds of those times that come up in a day, and sometimes we do, and sometimes we follow what the Lord's saying. Sometimes we miss it, sometimes we look right past it. But I want to go to another example here. In Genesis 39, starting in verse 2. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So here again we see God blessed this Egyptian, and he ultimately blessed Egypt for Joseph's sake. Because Joseph, one man, had a relationship with the Most High God, his status was elevated in Egypt. God hears his people. That is the point. God hears his people. Today we see our nation more divided than it's been in a long time. We see unspeakable crimes coming out of the most lifted up places in this country. You think of Hollywood and all these places that are lifted up, that are in your face. This is also happening elsewhere around the world. We see the innocence of children being destroyed with this new battle of the sexes. Innocent children who shouldn't have any part in this perverse battle of what you are and who you're going to be, speaking of gender, and they're being thrust into the spotlight, and the whole nation is being deceived and being twisted, and all this is being turned upside down, and I hear that almost on a daily basis now. This world's just crazy. This world's turned upside down. Everything that was right's wrong, and everything that's wrong's right, and you can see it. It's in your face. It's not hidden anymore. There's very, very little deception needed. It's right there in your face. And then, of course, Mark chapter 9, verse 42. And whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged around his neck and he were cast into the sea. And I looked up, I wanted to be sure. I looked up, the term that it uses here, little ones, and I forget the Greek word that it uses, but that is a broad term. Little ones, it can mean children, it can mean young Christians, it can mean just about like taking advantage of someone smaller than you, it can mean a lot of things. So anyone who misleads, deceives, one of these little ones that believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hung around his neck and he were cast into the sea. Judgment's going to fall. That's the basic point here. Judgment's going to fall. Those who know God will and have have in the past, I believe, been able to pray and ask for a reprieve and for a sustaining power for their city, for their country, for their group of people. This nation, I believe, has been sustained only because of the amount of God's people praying for it within and outside of its borders. However, if the church continues to capitulate to the flood of sin, it will be judged right along with the rest of the lost and dying nation. And in that sermon that I was talking about at the first, the call to anguish, there's one point in that sermon where, and I listened to it a couple of times just so I could catch everything that he was saying. There was at one point where, I think it was 2002, it was early 2000s when this was released, and he was talking about an HBO show. Of course, there's, a magnitude of worse shows on now, but I never watched it. But it was The Sopranos. It was, a show about gangsters and all this. And he mentioned that show, and he said, how many of you watch this show and then come and all the filth that's in this show, and then come in to God's house, and worship, raise your hands and worship. And there were people out in the audience, and you could hear it through his microphone, that started laughing. He said, "No laughing. This is serious. This is life and death." And he was serious, and there was one little phrase that he used in the midst of all this that he was going over, and it gave me goosebumps when I first heard it. And he said, "It's getting late," and he said it in a way that you knew that he meant it. It's getting late. There's with all this stuff that's going on around us, we see that there has to be judgment. There has to be just a pouring out of wrath coming, and it's getting late. 1 Peter chapter 5 in the Amplified, verse 8, "Be sober, well-balanced, and self-disciplined. Be alert and cautious at all times. The enemy of yours, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, fiercely hungry, seeking someone to devour." It's a self-discipline thing. This is when I was saying about how Abraham was pleading with God. It was a persistent prayer. It was a persistent coming to God over this. Please, for the righteous, please do not destroy the righteous. And he it was persistent. And this was something that's all throughout the Bible. Persistence. This is something we shouldn't be distracted. But not only that, we have to be disciplined to pray for these things, to pray for against all of this stuff coming in, all of these things that come in to distract and take into bondage. We have to pray consistently, pray without ceasing. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5:17 says, this is a commandment. This is something that we have to do, or we're not going to see God's blessings, and we're not going to see that holding back, that hedge of protection that we currently have much longer. John chapter 14, verse 12. "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also, and greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father. And whatsoever ye shall ask in my name, that will I do, and the Father may be glorified in the Son. And if ye shall ask anything in my name, I will do it." All we have to do is come before him, petition, Lord, you said that if I come to you with something that is troubling me, with something that is something that is disgusting me, something that needs to change, something that needs to be dealt with, this is my promise to you. If you shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. And I think that's the key. That's what we have to look toward. We've come a long way since all the things that David Wilkerson was naming in his message, all these things that were affecting the church, all these things that were coming in like a flood, seeker-friendly churches, and going around and whatever offends the people while they left the church, cutting all that out, and just focusing on the feel-good message. That was what he was talking about. These things that you're diluting the gospel because you want numbers, and that was what he was seeing in that time. Just make it more comfortable. Conviction's not supposed to be comfortable. I'm sorry, but I'm convicted every day with something. It's like, you should have been nicer. You should have done this. This is not the way. Your testimony is everything, and if you don't have your testimony, you may as well not have anything, because words are going to be paper thin if you don't have a testimony to back it up. And and that's what I see. It's the testimony of the church that has to be backed up with action.